This is chapters, 9-5 and 9-6. Please copy your cuts. Alright, trigonometry. This was one, remember I told you before we had to get into trig. This was the section that I, as a student, didn't care for. It was very difficult to understand. But, thankfully, I have a way for you to get it, which I believe is very, 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 very simple to understand. Trigonometry is really just to study a relationship between angles and sides and right triangles. That's it. The trigonometric functions are sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Okay. Here I have a right triangle ABC, where angle C is the right angle. With trigonometry, all trigonometry means is if I say sine or cosine, I'm asking you to compare two legs. The adjacent and the hypotenuse, the opposite and the hypotenuse, and so on and so forth. Here's the first thing. First thing, which angle are we basing everything from? Well, on my triangle ABC, I see that the leg names are called A, B, C. Remember, leg names, if you recall from some previous sections ago, lowercase letters represents the name of the leg. So I don't have to call this leg BC, I can just call that leg B. And I don't have to call this leg AC, that's leg A. Okay? Now, looking at this right triangle here, let's say I want to look at a couple of things. First of all, sine. Sine, remember I said sine, cosine, tangent, secant. All those things mean is compare two legs. That's all it means. Compare two legs to one another. That's all you're doing. So sine, when somebody says sine to you, they're saying compare the two legs opposite and hypotenuse. That's it. Compare the legs opposite and hypotenuse. That's all you do. If somebody says to you cosine, and the proper spelling of cosine, all the way spelled out as this, but we abbreviate it COS. If somebody says cosine to you, again, sine, cosine, tangent, secant, all those are just comparing two legs. Cosine says compare which two legs. They want you to compare the adjacent and the hypotenuse. That's it. Cosine means compare adjacent leg to the hypotenuse leg. The next leg is tangent. Remember again, tangent is a comparison of two legs. Tangent means I want you to compare the opposite leg to the adjacent leg. That's all tangent means. Compare those two legs. Here we have cosecant. Cosecant means compare which two legs. Like the sine, the cosecant means compare the hypotenuse and opposite. But they ask you to compare it in the opposite order. On the cosecant, you compare the hypotenuse over the opposite. Whereas when you had the sine, it was opposite over hypotenuse. So they're just switched or reciprocals. Okay? So the cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. The secant compares the two legs, hypotenuse and adjacent. And it's the reciprocal of cosine. Okay? So you're comparing the two legs, hypotenuse and adjacent. Okay? Cotangent. Cotangent is just the comparison of the adjacent and opposite, and it's the reciprocal of tangent. So each one has a twin. Remember again, sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, cotangent. All, when somebody says trig identities, they're just saying compare two legs to one another. You just need to know which two legs to compare. So if I say sine, which leg automatically do you compare? Opposite and hypotenuse. If I say cosine, which two legs do you compare? Adjacent and hypotenuse. When I say tangent, which two legs do you compare? Opposite and adjacent. Okay, and so on and so forth. So you need to look at cosecant, secant, and cotangent. The three that I really will focus on are sine, cosine, and tangent. But you need to know secant, cosecant, and cotangent. I can't stress enough. You want to memorize. If you memorize nothing else, this is definitely one thing you need to memorize. You're going to use this in trig, algebra 2 with trig. You're going to see it again in pre-calc. You're going to see it in calculus, AP calc. From here on out, this is your first year. If this is your first year doing it, you're going to see it just about every single year from. So if you commit these to memory, you'll be good. Ask a senior. They'll tell you that. Again, trig identities means you're going to be comparing two legs. If I call off sine, which two legs do I compare? Opposite and hypotenuse. That's it. Now, when I say the sine of A, you immediately know, oh, that means I want to compare the opposite and the hypotenuse leg. Well, when I say that, the minute I come in here and I put sine A, I'm telling you which angle on this triangle ABC to compare. That means you have to reference angle A as theta. That means everything is based off this angle A. So first things first, think about which angle you're basing everything from. In this case, sine A. I want to compare the opposite and the hypotenuse. Which angle am I looking at? I pay all of my attention because the minute they say A, sine A, I know I have to focus on angle A, which is the reference angle. Now I fill everything in. In reference to angle A, which leg is the opposite leg? It's side B, lowercase b. In reference to angle A, side B or BC is the opposite leg. So I can write that in. This is my opposite leg. In reference to angle A, and I know it's angle A they want because they said sine A. They said they said sine A, they mean look at angle A, and sine means to compare which two legs? Opposite and hypotenuse. Okay? Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's fill in the rest of the sides for angle A. In reference to angle A, we've just written in the opposite leg, which is this side B. Which leg is the adjacent or next to? Well, it can't be this AB or this C one because it is the hypotenuse. So I can go ahead and throw that in since I see it already. All right? So that means adjacent, if we remember, means next to. This side A is the adjacent leg in reference to this theta or angle A. It's next to. Okay? Now that I know in reference to angle A, which is the opposite, the adjacent, and the hypotenuse leg, I can do a comparison. Now I can compare my sine. They say sine A. They mean look at angle A. And what am I comparing when I say sine? Opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, what's the name of the opposite leg? In reference to angle A, the opposite leg is B. Which two legs am I comparing? Opposite over the hypotenuse. What's the letter of hypotenuse in reference to angle A? It's C. So it's B over C. Now, moving further. Cosine A. Again, cosine, say the minute they say cosine, I automatically know it's a comparison. Cosine means compare which two legs. You got to commit to memory what cosine legs you compare, which two legs you compare when they say cosine. It's adjacent and hypotenuse. Okay? The minute they say cosine, I know I'm comparing the adjacent and the hypotenuse. But when they say A, cosine A, they're telling you which angle to reference. So I know I'm comparing the adjacent and hypotenuse, but that means I have to go back to angle A. In reference to angle A, which leg is the adjacent leg? It's A. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so the adjacent in reference to angle A, is side A. A over the, what am I comparing? Adjacent over the hypotenuse. What's the name of the hypotenuse? In reference to angle A, it's C. So it's A over C. Now, let's go down to tangent A. If somebody says, I want the tangent of angle A, the minute you hear tangent, you know which two legs you're comparing. You're comparing the opposite and over the adjacent. When they say tangent A, they're telling you which angle to look at. So when I say angle A, I know I'm talking about here, and tangent means opposite over the adjacent. So which leg is opposite? B over the adjacent, which is A. So it will be B over A. Opposite over the adjacent. Okay? Cosecant. Again, it's just the reciprocal of sine. So you could just basically flip sine and be C over B. But if we look at it here, cosecant says compare which two legs? The hypotenuse and the opposite. What's the hypotenuse? It says cosecant of A. That means I have to look at angle A. And we want the hypotenuse over the opposite leg. So here's the hypotenuse is C over the opposite leg, which is B. So it'd be C over B, which again is just the reciprocal of sine. So C over B. And if somebody says secant A, immediately when we hear secant, we need to know which two legs we're comparing. Secant means compare the two legs, the hypotenuse over the adjacent, the hypotenuse and adjacent leg. Well, they said secant A, that means I have to look at angle A. And secant means hypotenuse over adjacent, so hypotenuse is C over A. Cotangent. Cotangent is just the reciprocal of tangent, so it's just going to be adjacent over the opposite. And again, if we look at in reference A, what's going to be our reference to angle A here, excuse me? So we need adjacent over the opposite, which is going to be A over the B, or the reciprocal of the tangent, A over B. Now, this is the part that would blow me out of the water, okay? You can switch these angles around. This is the part I couldn't stand, but I got this for you. Now they say go sine of B, okay? Sine of B, okay? First of all, when the minute I hear sine, I have to know what sine means, which two legs to compare. The two legs sine says compare is opposite and hypotenuse. Sine B means you have to look at the angle B now. We don't look at A anymore. They said sine B because they're telling you which angle to look at. So that means they want us to look at this angle B. We don't look at A anymore. A is a non-factor. We don't even care about A anymore. It's about which angle I'm referencing. First things first. Sine, I have to know the two-leg comparison. Sine means compare the opposite over the hypotenuse. They said do it from angle B. Well, now we have to relabel everything, because if I look at angle B as theta, which leg is opposite? Which side is opposite, in other words? The side opposite to angle B is this lowercase a. It's opposite. How was that possible? I thought it was adjacent. No, it's next to angle A. But remember, it says sine B. They mean they want you to go and look at angle B. And in reference to angle B, mark up your triangle. Write everything now. And I use different colored pencils and pens so I don't get confused. In reference to angle B, I mark up the triangle. This side A is opposite of angle B. The hypotenuse is still the same because it's opposite the 90 degrees. So I just mark this the hypotenuse. And then the leg that's adjacent or next to angle B is side B. So in green, I know that side B is the adjacent leg in reference to angle B. Okay? Well, when I was talking about angle A, side B is the opposite side. It's across from. Okay? I use different color pencils and markers so that I don't get confused. I know for me in this case, the green represents the B in reference to angle B, angle B. Now I come back down here and I say, sine of B. The immediate thing I think about is, what does sine mean? Sine means compare which two legs, opposite and hypotenuse. But which angle do you want me to do that from? They said, oh, go to angle B and do opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, which leg is opposite? Side A. A over, I'm doing opposite over the hypotenuse. What's the hypotenuse? It's still the same, what you see. Now they do cosine B. I have to immediately say, what does cosine mean? Cosine means compare the two legs adjacent and hypotenuse. But they say cosine B. When they say cosine, they mean automatically, I don't care if I'm talking about angle Z, angle M, angle Q, angle R. When I say cosine, I mean compare adjacent leg to the hypotenuse. But the minute I say the cosine of B, I'm telling you which angle I want you to look at. So immediately in my head, I say cosine, that's adjacent over the hypotenuse. And then they tell me which leg do you want adjacent over hypotenuse, from angle B. So I go back to angle B, and in reference to angle B, which leg is adjacent or next to? Green is my adjacent, which is B. cosine means adjacent over hypotenuse, which is C. There's my cosine, adjacent over the hypotenuse. Okay, and there's my adjacent, which is B, over the hypotenuse, which is C. So adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, tangent B. The tangent. Immediately when you hear tangent, it could be the tangent of angle Z, could be the tangent of angle Q, the tangent of angle R, the tangent theta. They could even say tangent theta. You need to understand that tangent means compare the opposite to the adjacent. But the minute I say tangent B, I want the opposite over the adjacent in reference to angle B, and you should have marked up your triangle so you know which side is opposite and which side is adjacent in reference to angle B. Well, which leg is opposite in reference to angle B is going to be A, and which leg is adjacent in reference to angle B is going to be side B. So it's going to be A over B. Now, I have cosecant of B, and remember cosecant means hypotenuse over the opposite, or just the reciprocal of sine, so I can cheat and I can do C over A if you remember the equations. Then secant of B is just hypotenuse over adjacent, or it's the reciprocal of cosine, and cosine is B over A, so that just means it's going to be C over B, excuse me. Yeah, C over B. That's a B. C over B. Now, finally, cotangent is just the reciprocal of tangent, which is the adjacent over the opposite. So I can go with a tangent and cheat and just do B over A. And that is trig identities. Two things to remember. Number one, you have got to memorize when I say sine, tangent, cosine, secant, you have to know which two legs you're comparing. When I say sine, you compare which two legs? Opposite, hypotenuse. When I say cosine, you compare adjacent and hypotenuse. If I say tangent, opposite, adjacent. Okay? When I start calling off, for example, if I say the sine of A, immediately I know sine is opposite over the hypotenuse. But if I say the sine of A, that means I'm referencing angle A. Look at angle A, and if I know it's going to be opposite over the hypotenuse, if I know it's the opposite over the hypotenuse, I ask myself in reference to angle A, which leg is opposite? Oh, that's over here, which happens to be B. Over the hypotenuse, which happens to be C, because it's across from the 90 degree. So you need to know and memorize what the leg comparisons are when I say tangent or secant or what have you. And then get used to marking up the diagram. If I say theta is at angle A, you know that this is opposite to A, this is adjacent to A, and that's the hypotenuse. If I say angle B, which leg is opposite? That's down here, A. Which leg is opposite? Which leg is adjacent? That's going to be B. And then finally, there's your hypotenuse is across from the 90 degree. Some people remember this by SOHCAHTOA. SOH, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. COA is CAH, which is cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And TOA is for tangent, is opposite over adjacent. So SOHCAHTOA is, some people remember, I usually didn't use that, but many people do. Again, SOHCAHTOA, S is for sine, this cosine, that's tangent. There's not one for secant and cosecant and cotangent. But sine is opposite over hypotenuse, COA is for cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, and TOA is opposite over adjacent. And that's 9.5 and 9.6, part 1.